Media. We don't want our kids of this next generation to grow up like Cyril, basically. You're listening to
Path of the Jedi
with your host, Ronnie Cruz. All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this tense adventure. That's right, tense. And I know last week I called it an increasingly intense adventure, which it still is, right? The show Andor is increasingly intense. The intensity has increased from episode to episode. This episode, it's just tense. It's just flat out tense, right? And it, like for me, it feels like riding a roller coaster, a big roller coaster for the first time, right? You get on the roller coaster, you're already nervous. You get strapped in, you're in the chair, and the roller coaster starts to go, and it goes on this uphill, and it goes up very, very slowly. And so the higher you get, the more nervous you are. But because it's going slowly, all this apprehension is building inside of you because you know what's coming. Once you get to the top, you know what's coming. You know that there's a huge drop and then loops and whatever else that the ride has to offer. Same thing with this episode. The tension is just building and building and building throughout this, like from start to finish, and with all the different storylines that we have in this show. The tension is just completely building, and we know that you know, with any kind of pressure cooker situation, if the pressure isn't relieved, it's just going to explode, right? This is a powder keg waiting to happen in this episode, and so there's a lot of tension, a lot of apprehension that's building, and so that's what makes this episode and this particular experience through this episode very, very tense. Now, when you look at the title of this episode, Nobody's Listening, right? That's the title of this episode of Andor. You really start to understand why, the major contributing factors as to why the tension is building and all the storylines and all the situations that's happening. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we get into that, let's take a quick break to pay the bills. I was at an event recently and I heard one of the most incredible stories that I'd heard in a very, very long time. A gentleman got up on stage and he shared how from January 2022 to October of 2022, he had lost over 160 pounds, 160, using the Yoli transformation kit. This story was so inspirational. And of course, it's ongoing, right? He's still on a road to better health and he's losing more weight. I wanted to share this story with you because for me, the way I see it, so many things had to line up for this kind of transformation to happen. Number one, somebody had to care enough about him, about his health, about his family, to reach out to him, to offer him this solution. Number two, he had to be ready to hear that message, right? He actually went on to in his story to share that it took almost 6 months of that individual reaching out to him for him to finally say yes. So he had to be ready. He had to be a place in his heart and in his mind to accept that message and to accept the solution. And number three, of course, the system has to work, right? The system has to be effective and the products have to be good. So all these things had to align, and you know, this transformation is a result of that, and it's gone on to inspire so many people to take control of their health, whether or not, you know, they have weight to lose, whether or not you have weight to lose. You know, like I think I find this story incredibly inspirational of what's possible. So I'm reaching out to you. I'm sharing this message because, number one, I care about you. And number two, in case you are in a place in your life that you want to make some changes in your health, you don't have to necessarily have to lose, 100 pounds. If you got to shed 5 to 10 pounds, or if you're already healthy, like me, I've been on the transformation kit actually for 10 years and I've been incredibly healthy. I feel like I'm getting younger and younger with each year. So wherever you are in your health, if there's some things that you want to change, if there's some adjustments that you want to make, I want to let you know that the Yoli Transformation Kit is a great all-natural solution where you can gain your health back. Right? So if you want to know more, I encourage you to go to pathofthejedi.com/resources and click on transformation to learn more about the Yoli Transformation Kit. Like I said, I've been on these products for more than 10 years, and over those 10 years, I've heard countless stories from individuals whose lives have been absolutely transformed by this amazing system, the Yoli Transformation Kit. Again, if you want to learn more, if you're ready to make a change in your health, go to pathofthejedi.com/resources and click on transformation. All right, Andor episode number 9, Nobody's Listening, with an exclamation point at the end of that. Nobody's listening, exclamation point. This is, I think, the only title so far that's had any kind of punctuation, and the fact that it's an exclamation point really is very telling. Now, it is a direct quote from Cassian himself, but I love this particular title for this episode because it's just it's so accurate, and it hones in on exactly what this episode is about. It hones in on really everything that's happening in all the characters' lives and all the different storylines. All of that points back to this title, that Nobody's Listening, and a direct reflection of why everything is so tense, right? Why everything is created this kind of pressure cooker, powder keg situation. The irony of it is that the episode starts off with Bix sitting in torture and is actually being forced to listen, right? I said last week that she was tortured, but it was actually in this episode that she's being, the torture is actually being inflicted upon her, and it's this recording. It's really, it's just super. I don't know, like, ew. I'm glad. It just gives me the willies, the description of, and you guys, you have to go watch this episode. But just the description of it, I'm glad they didn't have any kind of, actual audio for us to listen to. But just the description of what that audio is and what Bix is listening to, it just gives me the willies. And the fact, I think, that they didn't play any audio and they just left it to our imagination makes it even more creepy. But first of all, she's being questioned. She's tied down to a chair, and she's being forced to listen, right, to these recordings that are, supposedly are just going to break you mentally, right, mentally and emotionally, and will force you to speak, because a prolonged listening to this recording just causes all kinds of psychological trauma. With an episode that's called Nobody's Listening, and then we have at the very beginning of the show, very beginning of the episode, Bix being forced to listen. I just found that just an incredible irony. And again, the masterful writing and crafting of this show, it's just so well put together, right? It's really well thought out and gives us so many dimensions and so many layers. And just something as simple as the title of this episode, and then seeing, Bix at the opening of the show being forced to listen, right? Being forced to listen. So again, kudos to the creative team and everybody involved in this show, man. Like, I absolutely love this ride that they're taking us on. So this theme of nobody listening continues on through the rest of the episode in all the storylines with all the characters, right? With all the characters. Next up, we have Cyril Karn. Now, Cyril, again, I think I've said this before in the past. He, to me, is one of the most tragic characters in this entire show. I don't necessarily have a lot of sympathy for him, but I understand where he's coming from. I understand his character. I say I don't have a lot of sympathy because in this episode we see some behavioral patterns. We see a side of Cyril that we hadn't seen before. So we've seen some of it. We've gotten an inkling of it, right? In the early episodes 1, episodes 2, I think maybe even 3, we see that Cyril is he fixates. We saw that he fixated on Cassian and going after Cassian even when he was told not to. In this episode, we really see how fixated he can become, to the point where he's a stalker. He's basically a stalker. He's fixated on Deidre, and he's stalking her, wanting to get her approval, right? So he fixates and he seeks approval. I bring this up because it ties directly back to his relationship with his mother not listening to him, right? If we were to get a backstory, a history of Cyril's life, I would wager to say that it would be a bunch of stories of his mother never hearing him out, never listening to him, completely ignoring his wants and desires, and completely just criticizing him. For everything that he does, right? Because it's a relationship that's not unconditional. Yeah, that's correct. Double negatives, but it's the correct. It's not unconditional, right? Like, you would expect a mother-child relationship to be unconditional. That's what you would hope it to be. with this relationship, Cyril's mother, it's a very conditional thing for her, right? She definitely is very self-absorbed. She's only looking out for her own interest, and no matter well, because of this, no matter what Cyril does, it's never going to be good enough by her standards, because again, it's a conditional relationship, and so. I would say, I would wager, I would bet. Again, if we had a full history of Cyril's life, it's a life that where it's a relationship where he's never been heard, where he's never been listened to, right? And so it's created this, and because she's been so critical of him all his life, like nothing's ever been good enough. Unconsciously, he seeks that approval, right? And he does this with Deidre. Really, really tragic. Of course, like it plays out in just such a weird kind of creepy way, right? And Deidre is very much creeped out, as I think she should be. Yeah, that's not really cool behavior, to have somebody stalk you like that and just be completely obsessed and fixated. And actually, you know what? I take back what I said about not having sympathy for Cyril, because, and it's not as extreme as what he's gone through, but I'm sure we can all relate to having conversations from childhood with the adult figures in our lives, that felt less than unconditional, right? Like if you've ever heard language like, this is the gratitude that I get for X, Y, and Z. This is how you repay me X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I get it. I get where Cyril's coming from. Obviously, not to that degree. His mom is written in a way where it's very one-dimensional. It's a caricature of those traits. But I think if we, if as adults we can reflect back on those things that didn't seem as unconditional and as nurturing as we would have wanted it to be, we can move forward and hopefully treat and interact with the children in our lives, whether they're your children or others' children, any children that you happen to have access to and influence over, treat them in a much more open way that doesn't lead them to becoming like Cyril. We don't want our kids of this next generation to grow up like Cyril, basically. So yeah, I can definitely sympathize with Cyril to some degree. Now, a few episodes back, we talked about the growing frustration in this show. And I think that's largely the result of not being listened to. If we go back to that particular episode, that's when Cassian got arrested. In that scene, we see that the stormtrooper grills him for information, asks him what he's doing, and Cassian is trying to answer honestly, but the stormtrooper completely disregards any of his answers. He's not listening to anything that Cassian says, and arrests him anyways, and now he's sentenced to 6 years in that labor camp. We look at Cyril again. Of course, Cyril is like one of the prime examples of this. We see this growing frustration, this almost like seething hate in his eyes, as with every interaction that he has with his mother. Like he really, you can tell that Cyril loads this interaction, loads this relationship that he, for some reason, feels obligated to be stuck in, and it's because his mother never listens to him, right? Now, the flip side of this is that so much can happen and so much can be accomplished when you actually are listened to, right? When others listen to you, or when you listen to somebody else, so much can be done, right? So much can be accomplished. The example of Deidre, depending on your accent. Deidre, largely at the beginning of the show, early in the earlier episodes, she was not listened to. She was not regarded, right? Being a female in a male-dominated bureau, being somebody that's a bit of a maverick and an out-of-the-box thinker in a very, very rigid bureaucracy where people were just looking out for their own self-interest and covering their own asses. Deidre wasn't listened to. But now that she's being listened to in the Bureau, right, now that people are actually paying attention to her, the people that matter, the powers that be, are actually giving her some audience, she's getting stuff done, right? She's accomplishing some stuff. She's actually getting closer and closer to identifying who Axis is, who Luthen Rael, who's largely been responsible for all this rebel activity. She's getting closer and closer to him. And she's also getting closer and closer to finding Cassian, Cassian, who she has tied to all these events. Again, a remarkable example of not being listened to and then being listened to. Deidre is working her way up. Her authority is growing. Her reach is growing, and so she's getting stuff done as a direct result of finally being listened to. Now, moving on to Cassian, who, of course, is the central character of the show and the source of this particular quote, nobody's listening. He's still in this prison camp, right? He's still in this labor camp, and he's hatched a plan to escape. What he's trying to do now is he's trying to recruit people to this plan to help him carry it out. Some are lukewarm to it, but one of the key people, Kino Loy, played by the great Andy Serkis. Kino Loy is kind of the head prisoner, right? Like he's the prisoner in charge of the floor. He manages what everybody's doing. He really needs to recruit Kino into this plan. Kino's got to buy in because Kino has influence over the entire floor, right? Over all the rest of the prisoners. He is an authority figure. So for this plan to work, he has to enlist the support of Kino. The problem is Kino is pretty much one of those, like his philosophy is just keep your head down, keep your nose clean, be quiet, don't make any waves, don't stir the pot, and you'll get out of here when your sentence is up. Now, for Cassian, he's like, what's the point of being quiet? Nobody cares. We're just numbers to these people. We're just we're expendable labor. We're cheap expendable labor at that. And then what we find out actually later on is that the plan for this particular prison camp is that they are going to exterminate all the prisoners for an incident that happened on a different floor. So he's like super frustrated because nobody's listening. Let's hatch a plan. Let's work this out because they don't care. They're not listening. And he's also frustrated because Kino Loy isn't listening, right? Like that's so many layers again and dimensions to this one quote. Nobody's listening in the prison, of course. The guards don't care. The powers that be don't care because we're expendable. And then Kino Loy not listening creates incredible amount of frustration because he needs Kino to listen in order for this plan to work. Now, the last example of not being listened to that I want to talk about today, the most tragic example, as a matter of fact, is of the character Olaf. Olaf is another prisoner in the camp. He's part of Cassian's labor team, and he's an older gentleman. He's an elderly gentleman. We see as they work the line and they do their labor every day and they're serving out their shifts. We see his health declining. We definitely can sense that something is going on because he's less and less effective on the line. What the tragic part about this is that, number one, his compatriots, obviously they can observe this. They can observe him being less effective. They can see that something is going on with his health, but they ignore it largely, right? Because again, keep your nose down, do your work, you'll get out of here when your sentence is up. So the signs of his illness go unlistened to, right? The other tragic, really the most tragic perhaps side of it is that Olaf himself didn't listen to it, right? Like obviously, he had to have known that he wasn't feeling well, that his hands weren't working as good, but he chose to ignore those signs and not listen to those symptoms. And again, because he wanted to, just keep his head down and work and contribute and serve out his sentence so that he can get out of there, right? Very, very tragic because as a result of nobody listening, nobody in his team nor himself, Olaf ends up having a massive stroke and dying. So the result of nobody listening is, at the most extreme is loss of life. Now you might be asking, well, is it really that serious, right? Do we really have to be so dramatic about nobody listening? Does nobody listening really lead to the loss of life? I would wager to say yes. I think my perspective is that sure, like there are the lighter sides of the not so serious sides of not listening, right? Like just feelings hurt and things like that, which I know on the scale of things, that's pretty important too. However, I think it can escalate to more dire and serious actions. We see all these acts of violence and atrocities happening around the world. I would wager to say that if we spent more time and working harder at listening to each other better, less and less of these atrocities and these acts of violence would happen. I really firmly believe that, because again, not being heard and not being listened to, the less people are listened to, the more the tension grows. And if there's no venting of this pressure, if none of that pressure is vented, then it just builds and builds and builds. And as we said earlier, it turns into this powder keg. It becomes this pressure cooker that has to explode. I mean, you look at volcanoes, right? You look at Mount Vesuvius. And Pompeii, right? Like the pressure was building and building under that volcano, and eventually it blew its lid and it wiped out that entire city, multiple cities, as a matter of fact. Right? Same thing within human nature. When a person goes unheard and unlistened to for a very long time, especially if it's about something that they really are kind of reaching out for and need that need help unburdening themselves of. If that goes unaddressed and largely ignored by everybody else, then that pressure building within will explode, and it will, it results in lashing out. It results in lashing out. So we really have to be mindful of this dynamic and really work at listening to each other, right? And listening to each other without any condition, right? Not listening to respond, right? I think that's another aspect of how we listen, quote unquote, listen in the modern age, is that we're always listening to counter. We're always listening, it's waiting to give our opinion, and we don't have to do that. And in the context of how I'm talking about listening today, we don't have to do that, right? Like, you don't have to have the answers. You don't even have to share your perspective. Again, people want to and need to sometimes unburden themselves of these heavy things that we all carry in our lives. And just being there for somebody to listen to them is enough to help share that burden or unburden themselves of it. Again, you don't have to carry the burden necessarily yourself. It's just being there to listen is enough to help them get through whatever it is that they're going through. So be willing to do that. And what you'll find is, I think, not only is it a great value to the individual that you took the time and effort to listen to, but it is of great value to you as well, because in doing this act of listening, really listening to people, it reminds us of our connectedness as a human species. We talked about this in the last episode. Last week, we talked about how there's this intricate web of the human species of causality, action and reaction. And the action of really listening reminds us of that web. It reminds us of that connectedness, right? Because when we listen to others, when we truly and deeply listen to others, we hear that within them is a piece of ourselves. And within ourselves is a piece of them. And it's through this understanding that we realize we're not so different after all. And if we're not so different, then maybe we should and can be kinder to one another. We only get there through listening. Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully that made sense. It's an important message, I think, that we don't think enough about, and we aren't, consciously making an effort enough of to really listen to each other, to be mindful of, everybody else's experience. Well, we can only get to that point where we're mindful of everybody's experience if we really take the time and make the effort to really listen to them, truly listen to them, right? Listen to hear, not listen to respond. So it's an important topic, especially, again, given everything that's going on in the world. It's kind of a difficult situation right now for so many, and so again, just being there for them and listening will do a great deal for both that individual and for you. All right, well, anyways, what do you guys think? I know you're listening to this episode right now, so how do you feel about it? Right? Let me know. Let's have a conversation. Hit me up on Twitter. It's POTJ Podcast. And also on Facebook, it's POTJ Podcast. Or you can send an email to info@pathofthejedi.com with the title of this particular episode in the subject heading. And yeah, let me know what you think. And of course, please leave a voicemail. Or MP3. I'll play it on the show, and I would really love to hear your thoughts and listen to your perspective, right? Like that, I know for me, it is very one way, this form of communication. So I love it when you guys reach out. I love it when you respond to these shows and to any prompting and prompts that I might put out there, because it's important. It's important to me to hear what you had to say. It's important to me to hear your perspective. So hit me up. It's a POTJ podcast for both Facebook and Twitter. And of course, the email is info@pathofthejedi.com. All right, so today, for the shout out, because it is, it's the eve of, as of the release of this episode, it's the eve of the American holiday Thanksgiving. So I want to give a shout out to each and every one of you. I know I've done that before, but I can't say enough how much I love all of you for supporting the show, for continuing to listen. I can't believe that it's already, we're well over a year now at this point, and it's still going strong, and you guys are still, tuning in. I mean, obviously there's always more Star Wars coming, and so that gives us a lot to talk about, but there's also always a lot happening in each of our lives. And so, for me, you all allow me to share a piece of me on this show, and I hope that it reflects a piece of you as you listen, right? So I want to give a shout out to each and every one of you, my loyal and dedicated listeners. And if you're a new listener as well, you know what I mean? I want to welcome you to the show and thank you for tuning in, and really express my gratitude and my thanks for all of you for supporting what I do here, what we do here at Path of the Jedi. There's definitely more to come. Your support and your listenership just, it gives me the drive to continue to do more and do better for each and every one of you. So thank you very much for everything. From my heart, from the bottom of my heart to yours, I wish you the best Thanksgiving holiday and holiday season. And I want to tell you that I am so grateful for each and every one of you. This week's shout out goes to you. Now, of course, if you have a shout out, if there's anybody or any individual or groups that you'd like to give a shout out to, I'd love to help you do that. It's my favorite thing on this show is to kind of bringing more light to each and every one of our lives, right? To each of your lives. So if there's anybody that you feel that you would like to celebrate and that you would like to shine a light on, send that shout out to me, man. I want to hear it. You can send it to info@pathofthejedi.com with shout out in the subject heading. Write out the message and I'll read it here on the show. Or again, you can record an MP3, so that's even more personalized, right? That way, the individual that you're giving a shout out to can hear your voice, and can hear their own name, right? They can hear themselves be celebrated here on the show. So again, send shout out in the subject heading to info@pathofthejedi.com. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you enjoy the show, actually, here, that's not going to be it. Help me out. Let's get the word out. I've been steady. The show has been steady at about 100 downloads or 100 listens per week, which is great. Like, that's amazing. That's amazing. I can't say enough how much of a sense of accomplishment that gives me, that the show is really, it's solid and it's going strong, right? What I would ask though, because if you feel that this show continues to bring you value, and that we're having important conversations, please spread the word, get it out there. Share this episode, share the show with individuals that you love, share this episode with people who you think might find value from it, and of course, leave a rating and a review if the ratings and reviews are available on the particular platform that you're listening on. But getting the word out, really, it's yes, for me, of course, I would love for it to get the word out. But again, it really is. It's if you find value in the conversations we're having on the show, there's chances that somebody else will find value, and ultimately that's how we make a dent in the universe, right? That's how we start moving in the right direction. If we all really kind of start to listen a little bit more to each other and listen to conversations like we have on this show, then I think we could make some real progress. So please, if you would do me a favor, I would really appreciate it. Share the show with everybody that you know. Share this episode with people that you care about, and rate and review where rates and reviews are possible. Okay, so now it's really going to do it for the show. Thank you for tuning in to this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about Andor episode 10. So until then, be well, be safe. May the Force be with you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company nor Lucasfilm Limited and is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names and sounds and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is intellectual property of Path of the Jedi unless otherwise indicated.